Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Focus On with the Alexander Valley Film Society. I'm your host, Catherine Hecht, and we are coming to you live from our virtual studio based here in Cloverdale, California. Today, we will be joined by a friend of the Film Society, director Tom Shepard, who directed Unsettled, the feature-length documentary film that won the 2019 Alexander Valley Film Festival Audience Award for Best Feature Documentary. That's a mouthful. And the documentary is now streaming on PBS through August 20th. It was just extended, so we'll put that link up for you to find it in a moment. But before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for today's show. First of all, longtime supporter Michael Finelli has contributed again towards our longevity, a luxury residential specialist with Sotheby's International Realty. Thank you, Michael. And Healdsburg Hospital, providing quality healthcare to Healdsburg, Windsor, Geyserville, Cloverdale, Sebastopol, and Bodega. Thank you to you both. We offer this series, Focus On, regularly on Sundays at 2 p.m. and occasionally during the week when the moment strikes us. We had a terrific show this past Wednesday with Single Thread, Farm to Pantry, and Corazon Healdsburg, using Hamilton as a platform to talk about food justice and community service. All of those recordings, or that recording, along with the recordings of our other shows, live on our Facebook page and YouTube. You can find us there at any time. And no matter when we air, thanks to the sponsors I just mentioned, as well as you, our generous donors, this program, Focus On, remains free to all of the viewers and listeners we reach, no matter where they are. So if you care about this program, the range of guests that we meet and the depths of ideas which we discuss, please consider making a donation today through our website, www.avfilmsociety.org. That's www.avfilmsociety.org. Okay, housekeeping done. Now on with the show. So in October, Unsettled was the closing night film for our 2019 Film Festival, which seems about 10 years ago. But attending with the film at the time were producer Stu Harrison, a Healdsburg local, lawyer Melanie Nathan, who was also featured in the film, and Maya Worthy, the film's impact producer. Conspicuously missing from the lineup was director Tom Shepard, someone we had spoken with before on other matters, but for whom today we are especially glad to welcome into the studio. So without further ado, please welcome Tom.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Tom.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. This is long overdue.
Ditto. And our project was also screening in the Czech Republic during that same week. And so we had to divide and conquer a little bit. But, the Alexander Valley Film Festival is one of the highlights of our festival run. And we're so appreciative. And thanks for taking time to have these conversations every week and keep people energized around the topic of film and filmmaking. So,
oh boy, it's thank you for saying that, and it really is our pleasure. I think this has become a medium for us that really works, and being able to connect with people. I mean, think about it. If you were in the Czech Republic today, we still might be able to have this conversation. We might be in completely different time zones, obviously, but there's something about what's happening in our world that, for our medium, film, it works. It works to be able to connect. So having said all that, the first thing I was hoping we could focus on was going to be the film itself. And I want to get to where we are with some of the subjects in the film. But what we didn't get to hear from you, Tom, is how it started. And I know a little bit about the origin story and your volunteer work, but can you share that with our viewers?
You bet. So it was 2014. I was doing some volunteer work with Jewish Family and Community Services, which is a refugee resettlement organization that goes way back, decades and decades, resettling refugees. And they had just gotten the first substantial grant from the federal government to resettle queer or LGBTQ refugees. And that, was a time, if you looked in the US and many Western countries, that LGBT civil rights was accelerating very, very quickly. You had marriage equality in 2014, which was sort of winding its way to the Supreme Court. If you looked at some of the other countries in the world, and especially where we focus, which is in Africa and the Middle East, you were hearing horrific stories of gay men being thrown off buildings by extremist groups. You were hearing about things like lesbian corrective rape in Africa and honor killings based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And I was sort of looking around. I'm a gay man. I live in San Francisco. I've lived in San Francisco for more than 2 decades. And I was just, seeing some complacency start to set in the US. And I myself couldn't have told you at that time, Catherine, what's the difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker, or how do refugees get resettled? And so given that our own Jewish Family and Community Services in the Bay Area were kind of embarking on this new, initiative to resettle LGBTQ refugees, we thought, okay, this could be a really ripe time to try and sort of humanize the lives of refugees and asylum seekers, and particularly queer ones. So I think that was the beginning. I don't think we imagined that it would be another 5 or 6 years to finish the film, but in a way, I think that time allowed us to settle into the story, to get to know these characters, to establish trust and rapport with them. So it's been a great learning experience for me.
I really get that from you, that you have changed in the process of this project and grown. And I'm curious what was the most surprising for you personally during the process of making the film?
Well, I learned pretty quickly that the refugee resettlement model in the US, which has a really rich history, I mean, for years since World War II, the US has really been a safe harbor and has resettled the most number of refugees yearly until 2016. But the thing I learned, which is that refugee resettlement in this country has often been based on families. A family will flee a war-torn region of, say, the Middle East, say in Iraq, and if they come to the Bay Area where we live, they're immediately connected into one of those groups like Jewish Family and Community Services, who connect them to members of their home country. So maybe it's a set of grocery stores, or maybe it's a mosque or other kind of community organizations. And it's not easy by any means, but there are these mechanisms in place based on this system traditionally that allow people to get their footholds and their toeholds. LGBTQ refugees are not fleeing with families. In most cases, they're fleeing from their own families. And right. So if you're a gay Iraqi guy and you land in Oakland, quite possibly the last people you want to see are other gay Iraqis, because perceived or not, you fear that you're going to face the same thing that you faced back in Iraq. So what I think we learned is that LGBTQ refugees and asylum seekers find themselves at much higher risk for things like isolation and depression and sort of continued trauma, repetition of trauma, right at the moment of transition where they're already going through all this displacement. So I think we were sort of asking the question in the film, okay, who's stepping forward to kind of fill this gap right now? And that's how we kind of met a number of the characters that you see in the film.
Yeah. How did you end up taking care of yourself during all of this with regards to the trauma? That's a lot to take on and witness.
I mean, I think, we were aware quite early that folks, when they arrive here, are dealing with a huge amount of trauma, if not torture, and again, at the hands often of their own family members. So I think patience was a real big one, and knowing that trust was going to be a biggie, that folks were not going to immediately want us to turn on cameras and sort of regurgitate their traumatic backstories. So I think getting to know all of them on their own terms as much as that was possible, what they were going through. And I think, as I said before, I think having that time to just sort of watch and listen and connect, and for them to realize, okay, this guy's not just swooping in and is going to do a hit job or, something really superficial. He's really interested in our stories, and increasingly watching them kind of own their own stories as they resettled in the US was really, really powerful. But, I have really good friends who are therapists and really wise people who are listeners, and I was able to, kind of share what I was learning in real time with folks. And, but, I'll just say, having the benefit now of time looking back, I am so in awe of those 4 individuals who were going through so much and agreed to share that really kind of vulnerable moment and moments in their lives. It's very, very exposing.
Tom, I am so sorry. I lost internet while you were talking.
Oh, no worries.
Can you, people may have just heard you say this, but would you just talk a little bit about, from the piece of what you just said, following their stories and how that's a part of the filmmaking process now?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just was sort of appreciating now in hindsight how much courage it took for those 4 individuals to, right at the moment of huge transition where they were feeling incredibly vulnerable, to kind of let us in. And I think, there wasn't any financial incentive. You don't get paid to be in a PBS documentary. Many trauma survivors and refugees are not going to do what they did because they fear for their own well-being and the sort of exposure of their own situations, but also they're worried about their families back home and what harm might come to them by being in a documentary and having their stories sort of publicized around the country and around the world.
Wow, it's really complicated, isn't it? So let's continue on that thread. I'm gonna pull up a picture of the 4 subjects of the film, and I'd love to know a little bit more about where each of them are. And let's see. Let me pull up this picture here. Okay. So we will, from left to right, we have Junior, and then we have Mari and Cheyenne. And is it Mari or Mary?
Mari. Mm-hmm.
Mari. So Mari and Cheyenne, and then this is Subi on the far right.
Yeah. So, starting with Junior, and as you see in the film, like Junior's story really represents all the challenges of landing in a place like the Bay Area. And it sort of made all the sense in the world that the Obama administration was resettling LGBTQ refugees in San Francisco. It's got this deep history of queer rights. It's traditionally been an immigrant-friendly city. But, try living on a refugee benefit of $350 a month in one of the most expensive cities in the world right now. And so what you see is that in some ways the challenges just begin. Of course, all of these people had this notion, I think, of San Francisco as a sort of promised land for queer people. And that mythology has been in place for decades and decades. It was for me when I, came there in the mid-90s. But Junior's story really reflects like how difficult it is when the rubber hits the road. And I think he moved maybe 10 times in as many months in that first year of being in San Francisco. So imagine having migrated across the continent of Africa to get out of the Congo, get his refugee status in Cape Town in South Africa, then finally get his refugee status, and he's arriving in San Francisco, and then to realize for the next year, you're just gonna be on the go again, couch surfing. I learned from him the term internal displacement and really how many of the challenges are just starting for folks like that. Mm-hmm. Cheyenne and Mary, who are asylum seekers, they don't get any refugee benefits. So they were able to get a student visa. They were very savvy back in Angola. They were being persecuted even by their own family members and realized that it just wasn't sustainable for them to stay there. So they got in the country, but then they have to find a pro bono attorney to adjudicate their case. And that takes 3 or 4 years to do that. Meanwhile, you can't work for a good part of that first year. So they experienced some of the same obstacles that Junior did. I think, though, they had each other. And it was quite obvious when I met them just how in love they are and what a difference that makes to be able to do that journey with someone else who's got your back kind of at every step. Mm-hmm. Finally, Subi, who's a refugee from Syria, came by way of Turkey, where he got his refugee status, and he was very fortunate to land in the home of Fred Hertz, who was his housing host with Jewish Family and Community Services, and just had a number of avenues to explore in terms of being able to connect with community, and very quickly became an advocate and almost sort of activist around refugee rights. And I think initially, anyway, that served him quite well. So.
And let's now go backward down that lineup. So we have Subi has now started his own nonprofit, correct?
He started an organization called Spectra Project, which I see you have up on the screen. And it's basically a nonprofit or an NGO that works in countries of transit. So when Subi left Syria, he first was in Lebanon, and then he went to Turkey. And those durations can be up to a couple of years while you're waiting to try and get your refugee status. So his organization goes into those countries and provides direct support and humanitarian assistance for queer refugees who are kind of in transit.
Amazing. And then we have a GoFundMe here that supports Cheyenne and Mary's music.
So, I mean, another thing that I think contributes to this sort of amazing resilience that Cheyenne and Mary have had over the years is that they're musicians and performers, and they were quite successful in Angola. They'd actually kind of gathered quite a large audience nationally. And so once they were able to settle enough to start working on their music, and particularly now, they're doing some amazing stuff where they're writing songs about their own lived experiences and sort of the empowerment of women and lesbians and asylum seekers. And so they have put up this great GoFund campaign where people can reach out and contribute directly to the music, the recording, and the production of that album that they're working on. So
that's awesome. And then we also have a way to support Junior directly.
And Junior, you see the sort of little title card at the end when you see the film, was able to finally get a public housing accommodation in San Francisco that lasted well over a year. And now that has come up again. And so when I talk to him, he'll tell you just that struggle really continues. And so he has put up a GoFund campaign for people to send support directly to him that he can use to support his own housing coming in this next year.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing all of that with us, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
And then to kind of, so now you have this, the film is in the can. You just got a great little review in the New York Times. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And now finally streaming on PBS, extended through on PBS through the 20th of August. A success. It's a success. And I want you to tell us a little bit about 6 years ago, when you started the project versus now. Is this what you thought success would look like? Do you consider it a success? I do, but I'm not in your shoes, so.
Thank you. Yeah, I do. I mean, I think at the time when we were starting, very few Americans could have told you anything about this story. They just didn't know it. And I think that has changed. And partly the election of Donald Trump in 2016, I think most people on both sides, in our project anyway, both sides of the camera expected Hillary Clinton to be president. And she had already done some significant work around LGBTQ refugees. So I think that setback for immigrants in general, but specifically refugees and asylum seekers, has put this story on the map in a new way. And Donald Trump, basically the rhetoric that he used to energize his campaign, the anti-immigrant rhetoric, the people on the border, the sending refugees back if he wins the election, of limiting asylum, like all of that has translated from his perspective and from his base's perspective very successfully into policy. And the numbers of refugees that are allowed now in the country have been cut by over 80% since Barack Obama was in office. So, the number of refugees in 2015 was somewhere around 115,000. That's now down to under, I think, 17 or 16,000. And on top of that, Donald Trump has been very successful at restricting whether asylum seekers can even have their day in court. So yes, I would say that the need for more conversation, for discourse around the experiences of refugees is more important than it ever was when we started the film. And I think, when people start to understand why people come to this country and why the US has been a safe harbor historically, maybe folks will think twice when they go into the ballot box in November.
Good point. I hope so. Can you, one final note on the film before we move on to another subject dear to both of our hearts. I understand there was a very special PA on the film with you.
I'm very happy to announce, and I know he'll love it, my boyfriend Jason Cho, who lives in San Francisco, and unfortunately is not with me now in Colorado, but he was the best production assistant you ever could ask for, and then some. Just, you know, kind of seeing from, you know, the inside and from the front row this process unfold. And you know, Catherine, because you're in this business, like, you know, getting these films done and sort of up the hill is like, it's kind of like pushing a Steinway up the hill, and it requires a lot of support. And Jason's been amazing. And of course, our executive producer, Stu Harrison, who you know well, who is a supporter of the Alexander Valley Film Festival. And he's been my executive producer now for over 20 years. And having, I sometimes call him a Sherpa, you know, kind of helping move that project has been enormous. In fact, we wouldn't have been able to finish it without his stepping in and really supporting it. So
it really is something. I feel like every time we see a movie, I feel like we're watching a little bit of a miracle. There are so many things that can and often do go wrong, and oftentimes they end up just being that perfect little misshapen thread in the tapestry of the film. But for it to get completed and reach an audience, yeah, it's often a miracle. And what a nice segue to talk about storytelling and the power of storytelling and just how miraculous it actually is. You and I have had occasion to talk about education, film education work, and I think we've been talking about it now for probably 2+ years. You have a project that you started and have been regularly involved with, which you are now, this is why you're in Colorado Springs now. Can you tell us about this?
You bet. In 2014, right around the time we were starting Unsettled, a group of educators and filmmakers, some women at the Rocky Mountain Women's Film Festival, which is in my hometown here at Colorado Springs, gathered and sort of talked about what would it look like to create a kind of professional documentary filmmaking academy, and specifically work with young people who are from more underrepresented backgrounds. You hear a lot of talk in the field about equity and about representation, and a lot of that talk is valuable and it needs to happen. But my view has always been, until you put the cameras in hands of folks from very diverse backgrounds and provide training, I mean, that's really where the rubber hits the road. And it's been one of the most amazing experiences in my life. So we're going on 7 or 8 years. It's called the Youth Documentary Academy. And we work with 12 students who are very committed. We go through quite a rigorous application process, who are very committed to both learning film, but also to kind of see themselves as an access point to story in their own lives. So many times, I would say 80% of the films are kind of first person point of view films, where they have access to their family or their community to be able to tell a very powerful film. And in the last 2 years, we've been able to create a television series for Rocky Mountain PBS, that's Colorado's PBS station, that airs those films into a series called Our Time. So it's powerful to watch young people own their own stories, and it's powerful for them to see the competencies, the kind of professional competencies that they're able to acquire even at the ages of 16, 17, or 18. So I appreciate you mentioning that, and I know you as well. The Alexander Valley Film Society has a very similar program working with young people in Sonoma County and the region with many of those same goals. So it feels very simpatico to continue that conversation with you.
It does. And how have you managed all of this since the dawn of COVID? Are you still having in-person classes?
We are, most of our classes are online, very much like this, but once a week we gather in a very large theater that our site sponsor, the Pikes Peak Community College, gives us every Friday. And so we're able to go in and we're wearing our masks and we're like 10 feet apart. And we show work, we show feature-length work, we show past work from the Youth Documentary Academy, and we bring those filmmakers in to talk. And we're able to do that in a way that I think most folks are feeling safe by. And it's just, I mean, you know this, Catherine, it's like people are so hungry for connection right now and live interaction. So it's constrained a little bit, but we love it. But most of the classwork that we're doing is online. Yeah.
Did you just say that the past filmmakers come in and talk to the younger filmmakers?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so great.
It's so powerful because it's one thing for 17-year-olds to see a a 35-year-old or a 45-year-old making a film out in the world. But when they meet these other 18, 19, 20-year-old alumni and say, oh my gosh, they made that film, I can do that. I can do that. And that's very powerful to watch.
That piece of the peer-to-peer learning, and I know, gosh, my brain just went in 10,000 different directions. For what it's worth, anybody who's an educator or a parent of a child in the school system, our hearts, thoughts, and minds are totally with you. This is a mess, and I don't know what the right answer is going to be for families, but I do know that peer-to-peer growth and the peer-to-peer connection, there's a point in our development where our decisions and our self-identity, our self-worth becomes more focused and developed by the people who are our own age, and that parent voice starts to dissipate away. And I just know from, in the arts especially, we have to see people who look like us, who sound like us, people our own age. Generationally, yes, the variance and diversity is so important, but that peer-to-peer, especially in the arts, is so important.
And the films and the issues that these students cover it's not light entertainment. I mean, they're shining light on some really dark corners. The films typically deal with issues like racism or colorism or LGBTQ, bullying, suicide. The teen suicide rate in Colorado and Colorado Springs is higher than anywhere in the country. And so I would say over the years we've had 7 or 8 films that have addressed mental health issues, suicidality, and you're quite right. When young people hear it and see it through the eyes of other young people, it's much more impactful than an adult standing up in front of the room saying, here are the resources that can help you, when you're feeling depressed. It just brings the conversation into this other kind of very alive setting that allows people to step forward in a way that I think is really powerful. And that's the power of documentary film too, right? I mean, it's so, emotion based. It has that power to kind of open hearts and then open minds, and put in the hands of young people, I think is just very, very catalytic.
We had an interview a couple of weeks ago with John Cooper, the outgoing director of Sundance, and he said something so lovely about probably the thing he is afraid of that will happen is that he is going to miss being around young people, and how we need that. He was saying he needs it to feel creative and vital and all those things. And has that been true for you with this work with these youngins?
I mean, incredibly. You're hitting it right on the head. I think my own filmmaking has been enlivened by coming out here to Colorado Springs every summer and working with these young people who have fresh ideas, who have this sort of hunger for, telling their own stories. And I know that my filmmaking, and I know that this film, Unsettled, has benefited hugely. And also with the collaborations, because I bring 2 to 3 other filmmakers out from California and another down from Denver. And I think the kinds of conversations that we're able to have in the midst of those collaborations with young people have served to all of us. So yeah, you're quite right. It's like getting to go to summer camp and play in the sandbox, but also, really get to the heart of some of these issues that we're telling stories about.
And not have to be a teenager again.
Yeah.
So Tom, what's on your plate right now? Besides the academy that you're doing during the summer, are you working on scripts, ideas?
Yeah, I would say the Youth Documentary Academy is sort of first and foremost. We've taken a bit of a hit, like many arts organizations have, kind of in light of COVID. And so I think we're coming together and trying to figure out, okay, how can we sustain this organization over the next year and years? So also my co-producer, Jen Gilliman, who helped make this film, she's also one of the cinematographers. She and I, when we were in Lebanon, we took a sidebar trip to Greece, and we met several Syrian refugee families and people who were starting schools to teach young people. And so we were able to document some of those stories, and we've talked about getting that footage out of the can again, getting it on the screen, getting a sort of assembly or a rough cut, and sort of seeing like, is there a film in there, and where might some of the gaps be in terms of story and stuff. So that is something that just recently has kind of been reignited. So yeah, we'll see. I don't have any big major films on the horizon. That's for sure.
Well, I think you have earned yourself a little break on that front, but please stay busy. We need you more than ever.
Thank you, Catherine.
Oh, you're welcome. Gosh. So I think that kind of wraps up some of the questions I had for you today. I'm curious. Well, actually, I am curious. So you're a glasses wearer. How do you get your glasses not to fog up while wearing a mask?
Oh my gosh, I've not figured out a way. I've got some of these masks that have the little nose pinchers I've tried to use, and that maybe helps a little bit, but no, I'm basically foggy glass guy in front of the class every week on Friday. I have not solved that issue. I'll just sometimes take them off, as long as I don't have to, read anything carefully. So
I know I just started to try medical tape, and that did work. But then when you take the mask off, anyway, it's a whole thing. It is a whole thing. Well, listen, we're going to go out on a lightning round. We'd like to ask our guests a couple of fun questions just to kind of get a little flavor of your personality on our way out. Okay. So, Tom Shepard, coffee or tea?
Oh, coffee.
Oh, my.
Multiple times.
Same. Many times a day.
Tea is once every 6 months or something, special high tea. Yeah. Special, but infrequent. Yeah.
Okay. And what about pizza or pasta?
Oh, that's a tough one, but I'd have to say pasta. And I was with an Italian for 10 years whose last name rhymed with ravioli. So if I did not say pasta, then I would be forever remiss.
Very good. Very good. Staying true. Okay. And finally, woods or beach?
Oh, tough one. I split my time between San Francisco and Colorado Springs, and am drawn, I think, equally to them. But the woods and the mountains, I would add, are kind of in my bones. And as I get older, I seem to somehow get closer to my childhood at home. So I would have to, by a very, small margin, say woods / mountain.
Acceptable. Oh, Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. It's just so good to connect and see you again. I feel like as a matter of fact, we saw you at the Oscars fundraiser in February, and we were joking about air kisses and coronavirus, and then the world fell apart. And
right after that, everything turned upside down.
Yeah. So stay safe out there. How long are you out there?
I'm here till probably the end of September.
Okay. And then you'll be coming back to San Francisco?
Indeed.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll see you when you get back, and stay safe. Keep up the good work, and let's keep chatting.
Right back at you, Catherine. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Okay, everyone. Well, that's our show today. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you again to Tom Shepard for joining us. Once more, thank you to our incredible sponsors, Michael Finelli and Healdsburg District Hospital. For all of you who are sheltering in place, staying inside from this abundant heat, or just taking an easy afternoon, thank you again, seriously, for joining us today. It's our pleasure to bring this show to you. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay sane, and stay connected. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.